way, so you really can't mess this up. So that's from my 0 point. So my 0 point on this bore gauge now is 2.2 inches. That is the best tool I've ever purchased. Holy shit. Okay, so very aggressive. It should sound rowdy compared to the last cam. Alright guys, so we're getting started on the F100's engine again. So I've gotten, like I said in the last video, we kind of went over a little bit of this stuff. If you haven't seen that video, I definitely recommend checking it out. Put a link to it so you guys can go watch it. But I do have the engine. So we have the front two pistons in it. I'm going to go ahead and take it apart now. So I need to get the whole thing balanced, and I need to have about 20 thou taken off the deck. So in the last video, if you went through it, I actually explained deck height, and I explained a lot of the specifics of what I was doing with this engine because it was kind of a two-parter. So I had to do a mock-up, put the thing together, make sure everything was good. And you can see I can turn this thing with one hand. This is pretty much what you want if you have only two pistons in it. I measured the deck height. It looks like we're about 25 on the high side in the hole. So to play it safe, we're going to go ahead and do 20 off the top of the deck. That'll leave us at the most between 3 and 5 thou in the hole, which is perfectly fine for this application. I'm not really too worried about it. We're not trying to make 900 horsepower here. And then we'll go ahead and have the whole thing balanced. So it'll be all freshly balanced and ready to rock. So it'll actually handle the RPM that we throw at it. And I want to make something really clear here. We're not going to be spinning this thing to 8,000 RPM. It's a wet sump system. There's no reason for that. This cam is good up to about 7,500. So that's probably as far as we'll turn it on any sort of dyno application. Then we're going to make the power and see where it makes peak power at, turn it down appropriately, and that's where it'll live. So if it makes power at about 6,800, then a rev limiter will probably be at about 7,072, somewhere in there. So we're not going to spin this thing to 9 grand for no reason. I'm not going to break it. So we're going to actually properly tune it on the dyno with air, fuel, timing, and all that good stuff. See what the thing will do, turn it all the way to 11, and then back it down from there. So it'll actually last this time, because I think what happened last time was we had a timing and a fuel issue, and that was what happened. So make sure the tune's good. This thing should last pretty long. So I'm going to go ahead and tear this thing apart and get at it. Guys, welcome back. So we're finally putting together the engine for the F100, finally for the last time. Final assembly, so this should be good. So I got the entire rotating assembly back from my buddy Ethan over at JBA. He went ahead and got everything balanced for me. So you can see he gave me a whole spec sheet with all the weights for everything and gave me a final balance rating, which is really, really good. So also gave me one of these cool little sheets so I can actually spec this engine out instead of just doing it with a piece of paper like I was doing normally. But I am going to start off with doing bearing clearances. So in this video, I'm pretty much going to run you guys, especially if this is your first time building an engine and you want to kind of learn the whole process. I'll kind of speed through it. I won't go too crazy in depth, but I'll give you the basic rundown of how I do this. So we have a bare block. It's been freshly machined, so you can see everything. The cylinder's been honed. It's been hot tanked like 3 times. It's got all new plugs in it. We decked it, took 20 thou off the top of the deck as we showed in the last video. And if you guys have not seen the last video with this, I'll show you guys why we ended up taking 20 thou off it. So we go through everything and all the parts and pieces to make this engine happen, explain why we do everything. So go back in the last video if you haven't watched that one before you watch this one. But yeah, so we have a fresh deck, nice and shiny on both sides, new cylinder walls, everything looks good. So now we're ready to finally put this thing together because we've checked it all. So all new thread and galley plugs, cam bearings, all the goods. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this thing over, and before I even put the crank in this, the one thing I need to do is check my bearing clearances. So if you didn't know, a lot of you guys probably are familiar with plastic gauge. That's what you would use. Normally you would lay across here, go ahead and set the crank, torque it down. So I'm gonna do this a little bit of a different way. The other way you can do it if you don't have plastic gauge is you can actually put the bearings in the caps, torque the motor down with no crank in it, and then when it's all torqued with the bearings in it, you can take a mic or a caliper measurement on the inside, take that measurement, and then go over to your crankshaft and take another caliper measurement or mic measurement on the outside of this, and then measure the difference. So that's what I'm gonna do, just save myself some time. And plastic gauge gets a little messy and it's kind of annoying to deal with. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing in, get a mic. Today's video has been sponsored by Blaster, and if you're anything like me, you need to lubricate something that's a little bit thicker than the rest, that's where Blaster's silicone lubricant comes into play. A lot of us are familiar with squeaky doors, hinges, bike chains, bearings, anything like that. You can go ahead and shake the can, spray the area affected, and apply the product until the squeaking stops. The silicone lubricant's really great on bike chains and moving winches like on trailers, all the way down to wheel bearings and things like that. The silicone properties within the stuff actually helps prevent against corrosion and wear, so if you worry about your stuff rusting out or dirty hinges or things like that, this will actually protect from that happening. And at the same time, it'll lubricate and get remove all the noise, as well as protect it from future rust and corrosion. It's a very concentrated solution with more silicone, allowing you to use less product and get more out of it. Blaster's industrial strength silicone lubricants made here right here in the Rust Belt in America, and they've been the #1 selling penetrant since 1957. I know around the shop here with a lot of these rusty old cars, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't want to move, a lot of doors that start squeaking, a lot of hinges that start squeaking, a lot of pieces that just get flat out dried out. So that's when we go ahead and grab a can of this stuff, go ahead and shake it up, spray it on there, move the part back a couple times, apply more if we need it, and we'll be good to go. You can pick up Blaster for yourself at a wide range of home improvement stores as well as hardware and automotive stores, and grab yourself a can today and try it out. So if you want to learn more about Blaster's industrial grade silicone lubricant, head on the description of this video, click the link, and check it out for yourself. So that being said, I wanted to give a massive thank you to the guys over at Blaster for working with me on today's video. Let's get back into it. Alright, so we're going to hop right into this. So like I said in the last video, you're pretty much going to go ahead and put this notch right in the groove, slip it down. You can't really mess this up because they're keyed a certain way. The notch on the cap is in the center versus you can see right here it's offset. So you don't really have to worry about that. So these ones, I go ahead and I clean these bearings off. These are the ones that I mocked the motor up with. They're still perfect. I didn't do anything but rotate it over a couple times. Just kind of wipe all the grease or assembly lube off of them. Put them in dry on the backside. You definitely don't really want assembly lube in between the block and the bearing. So I go ahead and clean these things off and get them as straight as you can so the caps don't or mushroom the end of your bearing, otherwise you're going to ruin the crank. But you can feel them with your finger. They might poke up just a teeny weeny bit, and then once you torque the cap down, go together. But if it's offset, don't use the cap to seat the bearing. That wouldn't be a good idea. Put these in, and then instead of putting the crank in, I'm going to go ahead and put all the caps back on. And then one thing I do is I start the bolts. So you can see they don't come out. So I'll just get these in a couple threads where they don't come out, and I'll take like a dead blow hammer or a mallet, and you can see that the cap's going to be up on one side, and then you can kind of feel it smash down. And then now I can turn these in with no resistance. You do not want to impact these. You do not want to torque them down. Use the bolts to seat the cap. You can break the cap, or you can break the block. So be very careful with these when you're putting them in. So I'll flip this one over so you can see there's a gap right here. You might be able to see it. There, you can just literally hear it. Oh, I forgot to put the bearings on the top. I just realized that. But you get the point. So I'm gonna go ahead and put all those down and mic them out, and I'll show you guys what I get. All right, I'm gonna show you guys how I check main bearing clearances. You guys are probably familiar with plastic gauge. This is a little more, I don't want to say professional, but a little bit more of a clear way to see what it actually is, because plastic gauge can smear, it can move, and it gives you a tolerance, gives you a range. This gives you an exact number. So as I torqued only one cap on, I'm starting with the rear, and I'll work my way to the front. I'll show you why in a second. So I put the two bearings, the top and bottom bearing in this block, torqued it down 65 foot-pounds to start. And then what I do is I'll come down and I'll take a measurement of that. So these are roughly, I believe, like 2.23 or something like that, or the main bearing, or the main bearing clearance. So what I do is I know I'm gonna be somewhere around 2.23 is, or something, 2.21, 2.22, that's like where I'm gonna be. So I set 0 on a caliper at 2.2 inches. So I set 0 and I lock it out. Now that makes this not able to move. I can't move this now. And what I do now is I take this, you would probably, put it in a vise so it can hold itself a little better. And then I take a dial bore gauge, which probably a good amount of you have. If you have built an engine, this is definitely a necessary tool. And what I'll do is I'll get this perfectly zeroed, and you can see this thing swing. So it swings right at 0. So I've zeroed it right at the high mark. So you can kind of see it swings. So that's where my 0 point. So my 0 point on this bore gauge now is 2.2 inches. And then when I come over to my main, I can set this in on the bottom like that. And I can see this thing swing now backwards. This one looks like 2.2. This is 20 thou swing, which I remember it moved a thou, so we measured it before we turned the camera on. It's 21 is our clearance. So you can see if I take it all the way out, it won't go back to 0, but we zeroed it initially and it swung down to just past 80, which would be 21 thou. That's where we were. It showed 22, but I moved it around a little bit accidentally. But you get the point. So then what I'll do, I'll write that down. So I have it written down to where I have the cap and the block, or the cap and the crank. So I have our 2.21 measurement we've already done, and then I take a micrometer, I take that, go on the crank main, and I'll tighten that guy down until it gets snug. And this one gets snug right at 2.219. So you can probably barely see it right there, but it says 2.219 is the crank clearance. So then you can see my piece of paper. It's really messy. 2.21, 2.219, do the math, 22 thou clearance, that's good. So, and I believe you want to be within, everyone's different, depends on what you're doing with the engine. This one being a little higher RPM, I kind of want it more on the looser end of things. So anything above 20 thou is good for me. If it's closer to like 15 thou, we got a problem. So checking all these, I'll go from front to back, and I need to work my way from the back to the front because of where this tool sits. I can't put all the caps on and get this tool in here. So I'll do this one, then I'll do that one, then I'll do that one, then I'll do that one, work my way back. So it's kind of a rough little crash course on how to do that without plastic gauge. So if you don't have it, and you have some good tooling, you can do it. These are, I think, like 40 or 50 bucks on Amazon for a bore gauge. You can check these things out. I highly recommend if you're going to build an engine, you definitely want one of those. And then you can go on your grandpa's workbench and probably find a micrometer somewhere. Or go to Harbor Freight, you could probably get this stuff too. Same with the calipers. So it's not expensive, you just got to be smart about it. And yeah, I'm going to keep miking all these out, make sure it's all good, get the crank set. Alright, so we got everything mic'd out. I was having issues with my bore gauge, so I probably did this 3, 4, 5 times. But pretty much we started in the back of the crank, 22 thou, front of the crank, 18 thou, which makes sense. Usually the rear of these engines are a little bit looser. Front's a little bit tighter, that's where the drive line, the transmission, the clutch, are, so naturally it's going to be like that. So yeah, everything was good, so everything checks out. So I'm going to get some food and throw the crank in this thing, and then for the final time it'll have a crankshaft in it. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and set our crankshaft in. You're probably wondering about the rod clearances, so I'm going to go ahead and set the crank, do the rods in while it's in here. Might as well, it's a little bit easier. Also got to set the rear main. I had to go grab one. I thought I had one, but it was effed up, so I went and got a new one. Then I'm also, while I'm here, I've already checked it. I'm just going to check it again. It shouldn't have changed, but our crankshaft end play should not have changed from last time, but I am going to verify it. So, and the one thing I'm going to do, so this is a 2-piece, not a 1-piece rear main, is I'm going to offset this thing 3/8 of an inch one way. And so what I mean by that is this is a flat machine surface, and if you have the rear main and it's 2-piece and at the flat surface, you have a lot more probability of it leaking. So what I'm going to do is offset this thing, take my caliper, zero it, about 3/8 of an inch, push it down. And so what this does is over here, it'll make the rear main seal go up into the cap and down a little bit. And so instead of being parallel with the actual machine surface, it'll be kind of offset a little bit. So it's less probability of it leaking, a lot less. The other thing I'm gonna do is take a tiny bit of oil just on my finger and just wipe the top of this seal so it doesn't create any weird heat when it fires up and tears the seal. And while I'm over here, I'm also gonna go ahead, put a tiny bead of silicone or just a dab of silicone on both ends of this seal. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a bead, a very, very thin bead, from one side of this down to the other. It's a tiny bit right there. Okay, so 2 little tiny lines, that's it. No more than that. Then we'll take our rear cap, offset this, same way, 3/8 of an inch in. When you torque this thing, it'll line up perfectly. Okay, set that in, just like last time. Don't rotate it. Take our bearing cap. I like to go back to front on these, just so I can set this rear main. In case I have any issues with it, I don't have to pull them all back off again. Look at that. Perfect. That is what we want right there. It's also, I know my bearing tolerances are good. Oh yeah, that's awesome. She's gonna like all the RPM. Alright, so now we're gonna start the most fun part of this whole project, and probably the most time consuming, which is actually getting the rings gapped and the pistons installed. So this takes forever. So what I'm gonna do, just like I did in the last video on the first 2 cylinders, luckily I've already got those done, so I really only need to do 6. But I will be taking every single ring, every single piston, every single rod, and every single pin, laying them all out for each one they're gonna go do, build each one individually. I'm gonna do the top ring and do the second ring, and then put all of them together, and then install them accordingly. So that is gonna take forever, so I'm just gonna set up a time lapse and roll through it. I am gonna be setting my top ring at 20 and my bottom ring at 22. If you're running a hyper-eutectic piston, the top of the piston will expand a little bit more. Therefore, you might wanna match the ring gap. So if you have, let's say you're running 22 on the bottom, you might run 22 on the top. Just something like that to think about. So it depends on the piston you're running, but this being a forged piston, the top of the piston does not expand that much versus a hyper-eutectic aluminum piston that will expand a lot more on the top. So this one being it doesn't expand a lot, we're gonna stagger the ring gap like you normally would, 20 and 22 thousandths. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it done. Alright guys, got everything hung and looks pretty good. So these are pretty much all 8 pistons, all hung, all mic'd, all spec'd. Wrote it all down, and pretty much it looks like our tightest tolerance on the rods is 20 thousandths, and then our loosest is like 22 or 23. That's pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with that. That looks good. Bunch of scribbles, but it makes sense. So on all of the rods and all of the mains, the tightest tolerance we have is 18 thousandths. So pretty happy with that. I think that'll be good. There's nothing in the 30s, which is good. There's nothing, you know, I usually don't like anything that's up into like the 28s or anything crazy like that. 18 to 22, as long as I'm in there, I think I'm pretty good, and seems like all these specs match up. So yeah, that's kind of my scribbles, and I wrote down all my part numbers so I can trace back to this later if I want to rebuild this exact same engine. I know exactly what bearings I use. So you can see there's the part number right there. This crank is cut 30. There's nothing wrong with that. So, okay, so now that part's done. That takes all damn day to do. We get to change over to this thing. So now I get to gap every single ring. So luckily I've already done 2 cylinders. I need to do 6 more of them. So you can see the 1 and 5 cylinder are done, but I need to do these other ones. So like I said, 20 and 22 is gonna be my goal here. I'm just gonna go at it and go ahead and get these things done. So got a lot more work ahead until I can put it together, but we're getting there. That is the best tool I've ever purchased. Holy shit. You see how easy that was? That never happens. Oh my god. Alright guys, so we finally got this thing to where the rotating assembly is in it. Everything's in, all the way across, looks super good. So the one thing I wanted to point out is once you do this, which I've already checked like crankshaft end plate and pretty much every single other bearing spec up to this point, and everything checks out. Last thing to check out is get yourself one of these old school torque wrenches and check your breakaway. Well, the way you do that is you get one of these and you see how much torque it takes for this thing to start moving. So mine takes just about 10. So, and I think if I go around here and get up to the steep end, pushing against gravity, it gets up to about 12. So we could call that between 10 and 12 or 10 and 11 foot-pounds, whatever. As long as it's not above like 20. If it's above like 20, then we have something's tight, like a ring might have folded or something's weird. The other thing you can notice is, or something that I would note if I was building this, is look in your cylinders, roll it over a few times, and make sure that this thing is not drawing lines anywhere. If you have vertical lines in your cylinder, then a ring is probably not in the right position. So it's something you want to check. Last thing you need is to fire this thing up and have a ring destroy the cylinder, and then it starts smoking 100 to 200 miles into driving it. So something to look for, but yeah, check this out. So all my measurements checked out when I built this thing in my head, and if I watch this cylinder, one of these cylinders come up. Beautiful. Look at that. Damn near a perfect zero deck. That's what we want right there. So all the way across. So I took 20 thou out of it, like I said in the last video, and that landed us perfect. So Ethan went ahead and stamped in right here, so whoever gets in this engine later knows how much has been taken off the top. And this thing came out awesome. So I'm super pumped with this. So next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna get our Anderson camshaft in this thing, our precision oil pump thrust plate, flip it over and get the oiling system in it, get that bottom end finished up. Alright guys, so go ahead and finish off the lower half of this engine. We're going to go ahead and put some of the valve train components and the oiling system components in it. We have a bunch of cool stuff here. So I guess I'll kind of start off with the camshaft here. So we're running an Anderson N91. So I talked about this in the last video, but if you didn't see it, this is the cam card. So you can go ahead and pause it and take a look at it if you want. But as you could probably tell, if you know anything about cam specs, this thing's pretty aggressive. So the power curve for this one's for 4,000 to 75 or 7,000 RPM. Kind of depends on how you set it up, but this thing should make peak power about 7,000 RPM. It should be about my shift point. Probably spin the thing to 72. Not really much more than that. There's not really much of a point in spinning it higher. So we're gonna see where it makes peak power at, and that's basically where it's gonna set our rev limit. But this thing might make power all the way to 7,500 if I was to advance the timing curve for it. So it kind of depends, but overall, huge cam. 307 advertised duration, 240, 248, 50, 576 lift at a 1.6 rocker, 110 LSA. So very aggressive. It should sound rowdy compared to the last cam. The last cam, for comparison, this one 307 advertised, that one was 280, and our last one was 512 lift. This is 576. So significant increase in lift, which should have a lot more top end power, which I was hoping for. The last camshaft came in an engine I bought. It was nothing ever special or spec'd out. I just happened to have it, so I've always used it. This was the first cam that I ever spec'd for an engine. So being I like RPM, I figured that was a good choice to use. Holding all this stuff together is a Precision Oil Pumps high performance oiling system, actual cam retainer plate with their hardware, as well with their bronze retainer plate and their actual bearing kits. This thing's super sweet. So I pointed this out before, but it's actually pretty cool. So instead of just riding on oil, it actually has a bearing, so the cam can slide back and forth on a bearing, which is pretty neat. So that's actually a cool piece I didn't know even existed. So if you want to grab one of those, you can head over to precisianoilpumps.com. You can check this stuff out. And along with that, they sent out a baller Milling 68 high volume oil pump. This thing has billet internals. You can see it's got safety springs in it. It's pretty much been fully built, and it even came with a relief valve spring. So if I want to change the actual bypass pressure in this thing, I have a spring to do that with. As well, being this is going to make a lot more oil pressure than a standard one would, it has a actual billet drive shaft. So all this will work perfectly, and along with that, they even make a stud kit to bolt this thing down to make sure that this thing is going nowhere. One of the problems that I've had in the past, trying to get the bolts in underneath this thing is definitely a pain in the butt. Trying to get a socket on it and work with a wrench and try to get a bolt to actually sit in here, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So putting a set of studs on there will be super nice. So all I have to do is drop the studs in, slip it on, throw the nuts on, and we're done. And I wanted to give a massive shout out to Doug Grifo for actually reaching out and supplying some of the stuff for this engine. He saw that what I was doing and figured that he could help with some of this stuff. So if you guys want to support him, support the companies that support me, I'll have his link down in the description below. You can check some of this stuff out for yourself. So if you're doing a small block Ford, highly recommend it. Valve train as well as oiling system, two very important components. If you want to get the good stuff, check it out down below. All right, this should be fun. So pretty basic procedure here. Seen this a million times. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of draw this thing across, and I'm probably gonna run out of this by the time I get to the end of the camshaft, but hopefully that's all we'll have to do, because, and this is a hydraulic roller camshaft. I don't know if I clarified that. So it's not flat top at this time. I think the engine in my truck is probably the last engine that I'm going to purposely build as a flat tappet, mostly because, I'm just gonna say it, today's manufacturers of lifters suck. There's only a few companies that make good ones, and they're hard to find. So, and usually they're not in stock, and you have to wait forever for them to show up and just all that jazz. So kind of over it. Just gonna stick with rollers, and some decent ones at that. I think I had some Howards over there is what I was using with the new timing chain and all that stuff. So I might as well just go with a roller. It's a little bit less stress on everything anyways, and I don't have to break this thing in. I think that's one of my least favorite things, is when you fire a new engine up, you're always worried and paranoid about the cam. So we're not gonna have that problem anymore. Yeah. Dude, who the heck is in the dumpster in the behind this building at 10 o'clock at night? Oh, nice and snug. Pretty sure I also pointed this out in the last video, but we put in thread-in galley plugs. So if you're doing machining on this block and you're running anything above 6,000 RPM, I recommend go ahead and tapping these. So when you're at X amount of RPM, these things don't fly out. That would really suck, because then you lose all the oil pressure to your camshaft. Let's see if I remember how to do this. So what's super awesome is they supply their own hardware for these things, so we can pretty much have everything to put it on. What I'm gonna do is just take whatever I have left in here, which isn't really a crazy amount, but it should be enough for what we're doing. This is kind of a three-piece bearing. Like a standard bearing would have a race, the bearing, and then the race again. This is the same thing. It's no different than like a bike or a scooter bearing, or like a car bearing. It's just a flat version. So this is very similar to what you would see on a coilover. So I'm gonna take as much of this lubricant that I have, get it on the bearing surface. Don't need a crazy amount. This will be oiled too. And then you kind of sandwich it in like so. And I can feel those are decently lubed up. And then this is our back bottom. Just is going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt, I can tell. You can actually just probably throw these in here. Oh, look at that. It's like almost like they're machined to fit. So perfectly flat surface here. This now spins, which is pretty rad. Take our two bolts. This thing out to make sure is the bearing stays there. Sweet, and we'll go ahead and torque that. And the nice thing about this is now we have oil as well as a bearing. So it's pretty trick. I do like that piece a lot. All right, so on this setup, we're running a Howard's cam. There's the part number. This is the timing chain that we're gonna run from them. The reason I chose this one is if for whatever reason later on, I wanna go ahead and advance a retard timing, I can do that. They have a lot of adjustment on the lower gear. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this guy. They also notice, as well as the bearing for the cam on the thrust plate, this one has a bearing on the backside as well. I actually haven't seen that on these. So you can see there's a bearing right here. So it's a pretty neat setup. Overall, I think it should work pretty well. It's a nice double roller. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this thing on just like I have in the past. All right, you can see I got that number 1 cylinder lined up. One thing I like to do is just put a tiny bit of anti-seize on this thing, just on the top of the crank and the keyway. Mostly so if and when I ever have to take this thing off, it will come off. I definitely use way too much. Don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm doing, obviously. A little dry fit test here. So I took the bearing off of the back. It doesn't fit unless you have flush mount hardware, and we realistically, I guess, don't need 2 bearings. So I pulled that off because I want to use the precision stuff, not the Howard stuff. I technically could have used my old cam wheel and put just a new chain on it, but this is a little lighter weight, so it'll be a little bit better for us. All right, so you can see the stud kit's in, and one of the most frustrating things is trying to put this drive shaft in and then trying to balance all this and put the gasket and the bolts. So I'm gonna dry run this for you guys so you see there's no gasket. But I would literally just slide this on the studs, get this thing lined up with the drive shaft, and it clicks in. Look, no hardware, it holds itself. That's super awesome. That's something I've never been able to do, which is kind of nice. So I can actually dry mock this thing up, take my Canton pickup, see how that's gonna sit, kind of do a dry run and make sure everything's gonna work. So what I'll actually do is I'll take the pan and I'll test fit all this stuff. For now, I will actually bolt this down, but the pickup I'll probably finish in the next video to see if this one will work or if I have to change to a different one. This one should, but I just want to verify everything. And the other nice thing is they actually give you both gaskets. For whatever reason, these stupid gasket kits you buy on Summit and from O'Reilly's never come with both of these. I see a lot of people use this top one for both for the base plate. That's not what it's for. This is for the pickup tube. So this one actually comes with both. So massive thank you to Precision for actually knowing what they're doing, giving you the right gaskets the first time, so I don't have to go find them. Just like that, pretty much most of the short block is done at this point. Now at this point it's valve train, cylinder heads, all the good stuff up top. But yeah, the hard work and the machine work and the blueprinting is done. I've been making myself one hell of a spec sheet on this engine so I can go back and look at everything. Might be a little messy to you guys, but I know it's there. And it gives me extra assurance that everything checks out, which is really important. So I hope you guys did go on and enjoy today's video. I know it was a lot of information. I know a lot of you guys don't really care for the assembling. You want to see the action, the burnouts, the revving, the actual fire up, and I get that. But I know a bunch of you that are either my age building your first engine, or if this is your 50th engine, you can appreciate the work that goes into this. And some of you might learn something for this, which I care more about. So for the people that want to build their own engine, this is why I make this kind of a video. So hopefully you learned a thing or two. Hopefully you understand the process a little bit more and you feel more confident going into your engine. Because if I can do it, you can do it. I know I've done this a lot of times now at this point, and I've broken a lot of engines, so I've learned a lot. And so take it from me. If you're building your first engine, just take your time, understand the process, watch a bunch of my videos on past engines I've done up to this point, and you'll be ready to dive in on your first Model Lock Ford, or any engine at that matter. Also wanted to extend a massive thank you to the companies that supported me on this engine. Don't forget to check them out down in the description below, where you can grab all the stuff for your engine if you're going to build it yourself and you want high quality parts in your engine. So that being said, we're trucking along on this engine. We're hopefully going to get this thing on the dyno by the end of the week. That being said, I hope you guys went on to enjoy today's video and learn a thing or two. Like the video if you did enjoy it. It would really mean a lot to me. I put a lot of time into this video. I missed plenty of upload days getting this thing done. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the long block assembly so we get this thing ready to go on the dyno and back in the F100. See you guys later.